we knew that there had not been enough time for his lungs to grow the amount they needed. Like, he really needed to make it to full term. He has a balloon blocking his airway. Between 20 weeks to 26 weeks, I couldn't face people because I couldn't deal with the questions that I didn't know how to answer myself. I just feared going into work and being judged if we had decided to end the pregnancy. After we'd made that decision that we were going to do the procedure, we decided to start sharing the news with our friends, family. Because again, like most people around us, they think you get pregnant, you have a baby at the end of it, nothing goes wrong. But everyone was really supportive. Everyone was very aware of the procedure. Everyone was very aware that his chances were very low. Had a scan in the middle around maybe 25 weeks, 24 weeks, just to check that his condition hadn't got any worse. So that appointment then confirmed we were going to have the procedure done at 26 weeks. We'd got there in the morning and it was just waiting until they were able to do it because they needed a bit of equipment called a fetoscope. It wasn't even done in an operating theatre. It was done in our scanning room, in the sonographer's room. And to begin with, they needed to see where the baby was positioned because they needed his head to be kind of like up towards my ribs. That's where they were going to go in. But he was head down, so they had to move him by like pressing on my stomach to kind of like shift his head to where it should be. It was quite painful. And then they checked on the scan to see that he had moved, and he'd moved straight back down. His head was back down, so they had to move him a second time, and that time was even more agonising. But then he stayed, and after that they had to give the baby an injection to send him to sleep because they couldn't have him moving throughout the procedure. And then once he was asleep, they then gave me an injection to kind of numb myself, and then they had to kind of make a tiny incision on the top of my stomach for where they were going to go in, and the pain relief did nothing. I'm not gonna lie, it was very painful. I think it was a hot summer's day as well. The room was very hot, so I almost passed out. When they got in, I came over very faint, but once they were in, I didn't feel anything. They fed the fetoscope through the baby's mouth down into the baby's trachea, and then they inflated this really tiny balloon in their trachea, which it kind of creates a pressure which then pushes the organs kind of further down to take the pressure off their lungs so they can grow. The procedure was meant to kind of help the baby's chances increase to maybe 35 to 50%, which is quite a significant amount, and they were happy that the balloon was where it should be, and hopefully we'll start seeing results soon. So the next week we went for a scan. The procedure had worked and the baby's lungs had like grown quite significantly. There was like a little bit of a glimmer of hope that maybe there's a chance we might be able to bring baby home. And then I think it was maybe a week and a half later we had another scan again just to check the progress, and again his lungs had grown again. It wasn't as significant of an amount, but again that was really positive, and the doctor had told us that his case was now gone from severe into moderate. I was so happy to hear that news, like for the first time in a really long time. After that scan, I had started to have some leaking of fluid, and I remember being at work and I was like, I'm not sure it's quite right, but it's also not scarily worrying at this point. Because of the procedure we had done, there was a chance of going into premature labour. When I got home, I told Michael what was happening, and we decided let's just go to hospital, let's go get checked, just to be safe. We'd explained kind of what was going on with the baby, about the procedure. They can do a test to see if your waters have broken. It's just like a little swab which they do to test the fluid, and that came back negative, so my waters hadn't gone. So I went home feeling okay. I was like, oh, okay, well my waters haven't broken, so that's good. But then the next day leaking had got heavier, so I'd called up the hospital and explained, like, I was here yesterday, I've had this procedure done, I'm at risk of going into labour and I'm having this leaking. But they weren't concerned by it. They said it does just sound like it is the thrush, but monitor it. If it gets worse, then call us back or come into the hospital. So I was like, okay. And then the Saturday, it kind of stayed the same. It wasn't any better, it wasn't any worse. And it was the day of our baby shower. I was exhausted, I was on my feet all day. But when we got home in the evening, I started to have really bad lower back pain and like a constant cramp in my lower stomach. But then about 3 a.m. in the morning, I'd woken up and it then felt like contractions. The cramping was on, off, on, off. But I wasn't sure what was happening. Like, I've never been in labour before. I don't know what contractions feel like. And I remember timing them and they were 7 minutes apart. And I was like, surely this can't be labour, because 7 minutes apart seems very close together. I remember Michael, he'd had enough. He was like, you're in pain. This is like silly. We need to go to hospital. This isn't right. So we'd called them up and said, we think something's happening. We're not sure what, but it's now contracting like pain. They said, it still doesn't sound too concerning, but we'll get you in and check you over. So they hooked me up to a monitor which just checks the baby's heart rate, and then you press a button every time the baby moves. But I was in so much pain that I couldn't do it. So the midwife said, okay, I'm going to get a doctor now to assess you. We're not going to do the monitoring. You just need to be assessed. The doctor came in and saw us and said, okay, the last time you were here on the Thursday, can you explain every single thing that's happened up until this point? So I explained everything that was going on. She did the first test, and straight away that had come back that my waters had broken, and I was 29 weeks and 6 days pregnant. We knew that there had not been enough time for his lungs to grow the amount they needed. Like, he really needed to make it to full term. So straight away I just said, okay, can you transfer me to London? I cannot have this baby here. He has a balloon blocking his airway. I can't be here. When he's born, they'd given me a steroid shot because he was premature, just to give him like that last push to try and help him. They carried on doing everything they needed to do. And eventually they decided that the best option for us was to do a C-section because neither of our heart rates were coming down. So it was an emergency C-section. I remember having to get Michael to text my manager at work and explain like what was happening, but we were saying like, please don't tell anyone because we don't know what's going to happen yet. My mum, I think, then had to let my brother and sister know. Michael had to let his parents know. So we went into the theatre room. He was born at 9:14 in the morning. We were told that they had been able to get the balloon out and they were just trying to incubate him, just trying to get a tube in to help him with his breathing. There were a lot of like alarms going off, a lot of monitors going off, and then eventually the doctor who was working on the baby had told us that there wasn't anything else that they could do and that he'd passed away, and that was when he was 24 minutes old. The room was so quiet at that point. I think everyone was just a little bit broken. I still didn't quite understand what had just happened. I was still processing. It was just all very heartbreaking. Like, how are you meant to act when your baby dies? We'd stayed in hospital for 5 days. 3 of those I had to stay in to be treated. The other 2 days was just because we couldn't leave. We went into hospital with a baby and left without one. And then we went home. All the gifts from his baby shower were still in our living room. Everything was as it should have been for bringing a baby home, but he wasn't with us. Straight away I was then on maternity leave. I was entitled to my full year if I wanted it. Like, how do you organise a funeral for someone who hasn't got to experience any life really? Like, I never even saw him when he was here. I never saw his eyes. Like, I don't know how to organise this. But the funeral directors were really good and kind of did it all for us. Seeing a coffin, as heartbreaking as it is, but seeing a baby coffin, it's not right. And as soon as I saw his coffin, I just broke down. We could have gone and seen him whilst he was resting at the funeral directors, but I knew every time I saw him it was going to be that much harder. And then after the funeral, you're kind of just like, well, what now? I'm starting to go through like postpartum, but I don't have a baby. I went back to work after 4 months. I think Michael only had a month off, and kind of life just went back to how it was before we were pregnant, and it felt wrong. I started going to a support group and I met a girl through there, and we started chatting online. We found out that actually we lived 2 minutes up the road from each other and we never knew. But I found my people. I couldn't have got through it without them either. And it took maybe 5 to 6 months again to fall pregnant, which again felt like a lifetime. I felt so grateful, so lucky that we're in this position again. But then that quickly changed to fear of everything that could possibly go wrong. Like, is this baby going to stick? Is anything going to develop in the future? It was a really hard journey. I wasn't sure if I really wanted another boy or if I wanted a girl. Like, I was just so unsure of which way I was going to go. When I knew she might be a girl, I was really happy. So we might have one of each now. And then we had an early anatomy scan at 16 weeks, and that's where you can see more of the baby. And that was a really positive scan. And again, our 20-week scan was really positive, and she was growing perfectly. And I remember crying so much because I was just so relieved that she was okay. And it was probably around maybe 30 3 weeks, we were like, okay, I think we actually need to start on her nursery now. And quite quickly, baby girl was born, and Michael said, like, I think I can hear her cry. And I was like, oh, I can't yet. And then all of a sudden, like, just this almighty cry came out, and we were both in just like floods of tears. Like, hearing a baby cry for the first time is like emotional as it is, but when you never got to hear your first baby cry, like, it just means everything else. And then it felt like a lifetime, but after maybe 10 minutes I was then handed her, and again I was just sobbing. I couldn't believe that she was here. I didn't want to let her go. Like, she was crying, but I didn't care. Like, she could cry all she wanted. So we just had cuddles for as long as we could until they transferred us into the recovery ward. And then after 24 hours we came home with the baby in our arms.